welcome to the Whole Elephant Podcast. My name is Eric McClenahan, and thanks for being here. This podcast is my journey of trying to see perspectives beyond myself, beyond what I was raised with, and beyond with what I live in now. We're taking a look at how people live their lives, their career journeys, their life journeys, as well as their spiritual journey, God, no God, religion, spirituality, whatever they're using to get through life, however they see the world. My guest today is Eric Petersen. Eric is an actor of Broadway, film, TV. You may have seen him on Broadway as Dewey in School of Rock, the musical. You may have seen him as Shrek in Shrek the Musical. But my personal favorite is you may have seen him on TV as Kevin McRoberts, the title character in the show Kevin Can F Himself, which if you've never seen that show, just pause this podcast right now, go find it, watch the 2 seasons. It's one of the most creative and interesting shows I've ever seen, and we had a fun little chat about it too. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the chat. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
How are you, Eric? I'm good.
I'm good. It's nice to meet another Eric with a C.
That's right.
Nice.
That's the correct way to spell it. And
Exactly.
It's the only way to spell it.
You have found yourself on Broadway stages, national tour stages, film, TV, voiceover. What world do we find you in recently?
I guess my most recent job was probably I just did a Christmas Story here in LA at the Amundsen Theater, which was very fun.
Yeah.
So the last thing I did, I guess, would have been that project, which would have been on stage.
Nice. Wonderful production. I went and saw it.
Thank you.
It was awesome. You were awesome,
Thank you.
obviously. Take me back to the start of this acting gig and how it started for you. I read somewhere that you started acting because you missed a soccer practice or something.
Yes, that
something
is
along
true.
those lines. Take me back all the way back to the beginning, man.
Sure. So I'm from Chicago originally, suburbs of Chicago, west suburbs, Carroll Stream specifically. And I was always a class clown. I was definitely a goofball, but I didn't necessarily think that I wanted to be an actor. It was not some sort of lifelong dream. In fact, my big dream, like all through childhood that I can remember, was wanting to be an animator. I loved cartooning and drawing, and my big dream was to like be an animator for Disney. And I did enjoy performing, I guess, because I had this dream that I would somehow be the first person to be that would animate and voice a character in a Disney film. It didn't happen. It's not really how the system works. But as a kid, I thought that was my big dream. But I started doing theater basically because freshman year of high school, I was going to play soccer. My dad and my best friend convinced me to try out for the football team. But when I was a freshman in high school, I was 5'2" and 95 pounds. I was like a tiny little boy. And I just got killed in football tryouts. And as much as I'm a big sports guy and I love sports, I love playing sports, I was not is tremendously athletically gifted, let's say. And so I basically lasted like 2 weeks on the football team. And eventually I was to the point where I could barely walk because I was just getting beat up so bad. And so I was like, oh man, I think I got to quit the football team, but I'll just go do soccer. And then I found out that I'd missed the soccer tryout. So I had nothing to do in, the start of the school year. And somebody, I think it was, and I always tell this story and I wish I could remember who this person was, because it was somebody in my friend circle was like, you should try out for the play. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll do that. And as soon as I did, I was just like, oh yeah, these are my people. This is my tribe. This is where I'm supposed to be. So started doing theater in high school. Again, didn't think that I would do it necessarily for a career until about probably junior, maybe senior year of high school. I was like, well, I've been starting to get cast as the lead in a lot of these shows. I think I'm pretty good at this. People keep telling me that they think I'm great at this skill. And so then I decided to go to college and went to Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. You can see it. I have a poster of it behind me.
Nice. Perfect.
That's right. And it's a little like small liberal arts school in Peoria, Illinois, like smack dab in the middle of the country. And it had a small theater department, but it was great for me because I got a lot of opportunities. I got a lot of attention from the faculty, and they really pushed me. And then should I keep going, or I don't know. I don't want to ruin your flow.
No, I have so many questions. First of all, whoever that friend was like needs to step up and remind you because that's like a
For
big
real,
deal.
yeah.
That like changed the course of your life. I mean,
Yes, massively,
like I would be
massively.
taking all the credit for that if that was me and I had
Yeah.
done that. Did you know early on that you could sing? Did you have any idea not only acting but that singing would be part of this thing?
Interestingly enough, so I come from a pretty musical family in that my mom was very musical. She taught piano lessons in our house every day after school, like to the neighborhood. So we always had people in our house every day from basically like 3 till 6 taking piano lessons.
Hmm.
So there was always music happening in my house. My mom also played flute and piccolo and played in the DuPage Symphony Orchestra, which was like the county symphony orchestra, which was a really good
Cool.
orchestra. And she had played in that because her mom also had played flute and piccolo in that. And there was a time when my mom was only like 17 that they were in the orchestra together, which is kind of cool. So she and my mom went to school for music education. So it was definitely like a big part of my life. And I sang in like church choir all growing up. And then I remember, I think I was singing with the adult choir by the time I was like probably 16 or 17. Um, so it was always like a part of my life, but like I never took voice lessons. It wasn't like I didn't go to voice teachers or anything like that.
Yeah.
It just was kind of like a part of my life. I definitely learned to sing a lot from both going to church, but also I'm a huge Frank Sinatra fan. So even before I knew that I wanted to be an actor, this was probably when I was about 11 or 12 years old. And I remember very clearly I was home on a Sunday afternoon and the movie Anchors Away came on with Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra. And this old, sailors, MGM musical. And I was just like, I love that guy. Like what he does, I want to do that. So I didn't even know yet that I wanted to be an actor, but I knew that I loved Frank Sinatra. So I definitely listened to just countless hours of Sinatra as a kid and trying to emulate him, which is definitely where I think some of my vocal, ability has,
Yeah.
came from. But yeah, so music was definitely a part of my life, but I don't know that I assumed that it would be a big part of my like adult life and professional life.
Yeah. Was there a specific role or a specific player musical that you remember early on where that kind of clicked and you went, I think I actually really
Yeah.
like.
Well, I do remember I did Wizard of Oz in high school and I played the Scarecrow and I was always pretty good at mimicking and not necessarily doing like impressions of celebrities, but I could always like kind of mimic, accents and it just like I don't know, it made sense in my ear and I could do it pretty easily. And I remember when we did Wizard of Oz that I essentially was doing a Ray Bolger impression, but
Yeah.
I remember it sounding really good and warm and round and like the tones were just very full and kind of delicious. And as I was doing it, thinking like, ooh, this is kind of nice. And I mean, that's probably when I started, in like high school parties being like, hey girls, you want to hear me do a little crooning? And like trying to use it, to try to like pick up a girl or something in high
Yeah, that's
school.
how my
Uh,
musical career began.
that's right. It always starts there. But yeah, so it's probably that was one of the early ones where I was like, oh, I think that the sound that I'm making as an individual, as opposed to singing in like choir or something, I was like, I can do this pretty well, and it feels good in my voice. I understand what I'm doing, and yeah, that was probably the
Yeah.
first role.
You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think I've picked up many Broadway playbills where it says graduated from Bradley.
That is
Um,
correct.
what was that leap like? What was it like heading into the real world after being at a
Yeah.
small liberal arts school?
You know, I talk about this a lot because I just talked actually my school, even though it's in Peoria, they do a Hollywood semester. So they bring like 20 kids out to Hollywood
Yeah.
every semester. And I usually go and talk to them. And a lot of times none of them are actors. They're all, into like animation or sports broadcasting or whatever. But I always say I'm such a proud graduate of Bradley because it was this little school that could, and it just like I think helped me to be a good person and like a good like actor. And while when I graduated and moved to New York, I had essentially zero connections. Like I didn't have a showcase, I didn't have alumni that I could lean on. It really felt kind of like it when I made it there that it was a lot on my own doing, but I
Hmm.
think that the foundation that I learned at a small school and not having, there are plenty of big musical theater schools that have great education and great alumni connections, and you can graduate from there and they will get you set up on a nice track. And I'm not in any way bashing those schools,
Yeah.
but those schools have a lot more competition. They have, some of them have policies where you can't even audition for a play until your junior year.
Mm.
Whereas for me at this little school, Bradley, I was the lead in the show from my freshman year, first show, all the way through senior year. So I had so much experience on the stage.
Yeah.
And while I took plenty of good, important classes in college, where I really feel like I learned how to be a person and an actor was in productions and doing
Mm.
shows and rehearsals after classes and stuff like that. So I loved going there, and I think it in the long run was the best thing for me because it really just had such a strong foundation. I remember when I got my first Broadway show, which was Shrek the Musical. I was playing Papa Ogre and one of the three little pigs, and that show opens with Papa Ogre right at the top. So when I joined that show, it had already been running. I was a replacement. So for them, for most people, it was not like a big deal. It was just another Tuesday night, in
Yeah.
the run. But for
Sure.
me, it was like my Broadway debut, and I was like super excited. And I don't get too nervous, but I was pretty nervous that night. And I remember right before the curtain went up, because it would be like the curtain's up, and then boom, there's Papa Ogre, and doing a scene. And I was a little nervous, and I remember thinking, like, right before the curtain went up, I was like, I've done 100 shows in college, and I know how to be on a stage and like capture a stage and own it and seize it and
Yeah.
really feel like locked in. And in theater you can't see past the first three or four rows anyway. So I remember
Sure.
like actually saying to myself before the curtain went up, like, you can do this because you did it at Bradley. Like you've done it for a theater of 500, so you can do it for a theater of 2000. It's no different.
Yeah. Did you have the typical I'm moving to New York, one bedroom apartment with five roommates and auditioning and this is scary big city type of experience? How did it go from you that transition?
That's it. Well, first of all, it's a great story because so uh when I had gone to Bradley, I was doing, plays and musicals, but we only did, I think we only did two musicals. We did a musical every other year. We would do a musical and then a Shakespeare show alternating.
Mm.
So I'd only done two musicals in high school, two musicals in college, and enjoyed musicals, and I loved Broadway and I listened to a lot of Broadway, but like my dream really was to be on TV and to do sitcoms was really like
Mm.
where I was like, that's my dream. That's really what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
And so I graduated from Bradley and I went to go work at a place called the Barn Theater in Augusta, Michigan, which is like Southwest Michigan. Great, really old resident summer stock theater. And that summer I figured I would do this summer of summer stock, and then I was going to move out to LA. I in fact already had a job out in LA at a
Mm.
punk record label. Do you remember Drive Through Records from
Oh
when we
yeah.
were younger? So
Yes.
Drive Through, I was a huge
Absolutely.
Drive Through Records fan, and so I had already been in contact with them, and they were like, yeah, you got a job like working in the stock room, but it was a
Mhm.
job, and like my plan really was to do that summer in Michigan and then move out to LA. And that summer that I was in Michigan, I started to date a girl, and she was pretty great. And then at the end of the summer, I was like, "So what are you doing? When the summer's over?" And she was like, "Oh, I'm actually moving to New York." And I was like, "That's crazy! I'm moving to New York too." And I totally changed, literally my entire life plan, like in a second, in a conversation with a girl.
Yeah.
And it was the right choice because she's now my wife. We've been together for
Oh,
20 years.
hey.
We got
So you
two
don't have to
kids. So
track that one down. That
no,
one
no,
you
no.
know.
Yes, that one I know who that was. And so that's how I got to New York. So my plan was not necessarily to go to New York City. But then once I did, when I first moved there, I got to admit, I really did not like it. I felt not intimidated because I'm from Chicago, so like I've been around big cities. It didn't feel like that I was like a small town bumpkin. Like, oh my gosh, the city's so big. But I
Sure.
what I didn't like was being a Midwesterner. I did not like that. Like in New York, people don't like look you in the eye and like give you
Yeah.
the good morning nod. That like in the Midwest, when you pass anybody, you just hey, good morning. Like that
Right.
stuff doesn't exist in New York. And so I remember really like feeling for the first probably 3 to 6 months like, I do not like this. I don't want to be here. This is wrong. And my wife, I mean, she was my girlfriend at the time. She was like, just stick it out. I think you're going to be okay. And I remember it was a random day on the subway, and I'd been in New York for about 4 months, 4 or 5 months. And I was like reading the paper on the way into the city, and somebody was looking at the subway map over my shoulder and was a little confused. And I was just like, you need help? And they're like, yeah, I'm trying to find the 14th Street stop or whatever. And I was like, you're going to take the N and then transfer, and you'll see it right there. And in that moment, I was like, I'm a New Yorker. And it
Here
like
I
literally all clicked. And I
am.
was like, oh, people aren't mean there. It's just that it's a hard city and it's so active, and there's so much like, electricity and movement that you kind of have to be like head down, just get to your next location. And
Right.
so once I realized that, then I was like, oh, I love this city. I really
Yeah.
enjoy living here. So yeah, I definitely had those early days. I didn't share an apartment with a bunch of people. I had a couple bad apartments, but luckily me and my now wife, kind of we had each other as we went through
Yeah,
those
yeah,
early days.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, what was auditioning like when you first got there? What was the time between moving there and getting your first gig?
Um, let's see. I had one gig that I was gonna go do down in South Carolina. That was somebody that I'd worked with from that summer in Michigan. But then my wife and I both got cast in the TheaterWorks USA production of Huck Finn.
Oh, nice.
And that was probably about 6 months after moving to the city. Well, it didn't take too long. I felt pretty lucky in that. Um, and then that gig led to like another little mini tour, and then I did a reading, and then I did a musical in like a church basement, and there was a lot of little gigs
Yeah.
that kind of led to eventually I did a play that I this is a good story. I got cast in a play, and it was only because in New York, when you don't live in Midtown, bathrooms are scarce and are hard to come
Oh
by.
yeah, big
And there was
time.
there was a day where I had like an audition, and then I had something later in the day, but I had like 2 hours in the middle, and I had to go to the bathroom. And so I went to the equity building because I was an equity member at that point. And I just went in because I needed to use the bathroom, and I and so I used my union card to get in. And then after I'd gone to the bathroom, I like looked at the board, and there was like a play auditioning, and they just said bring in a monologue, and I was like, okay. And I went in and auditioned for this play, ended up getting cast. It was this great little like 2-person play. And I ended up roundabout this different story, but I ended up getting my agent from that play, which was kind of amazing that it was so happenstance that I just needed to use the bathroom.
Yeah, no, I think I can remember exactly where I was the first time I went to New York and thought, where the hell do you go to the bathroom around here? Like, am I really
It's
going
like
all
a
the way back to my
problem.
hotel right now? Like, what is that?
Yeah, it's insane. You definitely learn the places. There's actually a great TikTok account of a woman who lives in New York, and she kind of rates public bathrooms, and she
Oh,
like
nice.
talks about, okay, if you're going number two, you're gonna want to go to these places. If you just need a quick one, hit these places up. She's got a whole ecosystem of them.
Yeah, explain to me the concept of replacement in my mind makes very little sense because somebody has originated this role in which they did
Mhm.
rehearsals and workshops and previews and then probably at least a year run of it, and then they're like, and here's the new person, and it kind of feels
Yep.
like you just get thrown in. I have
Oh
no
yeah.
idea how, especially like in School of Rock, if you're taking on a role like Dewey and it's such a big massive thing,
Yeah.
how do you get ready for that?
Um, okay, couple of things to answer that. One, the replacement process is interesting and it is different every time.
Hmm.
I will say like my first big job was I did the first national tour of 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. So that
Hmm.
wasn't a replacement. I was cast, but we were doing a role that had been done before. And
Right.
so anytime you're either stepping into an existing show and your replacement, or you're doing a tour that has, of a show that's either currently happening or just finished, there's always the question of are the directors and producers wanting you to recreate the performance that was there before?
Right.
Do they want you to make it their own, or somewhere in the middle?
Right.
Usually it's somewhere in the middle,
Right.
even though a lot of times they will tell you, no, we just want you to make it your own and bring yourself to it. At the end of the day, if it's from a product that was established and was working,
Yeah.
they wanted to live somewhere in that world, right?
Yeah.
Like to completely reinvent the wheel is not usually going to behoove you.
Right.
So, like with Spelling Bee, I didn't do Dan Fogler's performance, but I have to like honor some of the things that he's set up. When I, went into Shrek, I was essentially playing Papa Ogre, and that was an interesting replacement thing because it was a 12-week replacement. So it wasn't even open ended, which
Mm.
is when it's that, then you can make something a little bit more your own. This was the guy who was playing the role had hurt his knee and had to be out
Oh
of the
yeah.
show for 12 weeks.
Hmm.
So, like in that case, it's really not on me to recreate my own
Right.
interpretation. I'm
Right.
trying to
Right.
like be a peg that fits into the already working board.
Right.
Um, and then like for something like School of Rock, where I was going in to replace Alex as the lead in the show, but then it was going to be my role. That one I had probably 2 weeks of rehearsal, maybe 3 weeks of rehearsal, but not a super long rehearsal process comparatively to if you're originating a role. And like you said, you do workshops and readings and out of town tryouts and
Right.
long rehearsal process. And those you have to sort of like come in as prepared as possible, being off book as much as you can, just because when you only have 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you don't want to waste that time trying to learn lines. You're trying to learn the blocking, you're trying to learn the
Yeah.
choreography. For me, I did not know how to play guitar before I started School of Rock,
Mm.
so I'm like massively trying to like get myself to being a halfway decent guitar player.
Sure.
And one of the things I learned when I was going into Shrek was trying to physically condition myself for whatever this show was going to be. Both Shrek and School of Rock were like insanely physically demanding shows.
Yeah.
Shrek, because I wore a 50-pound fat suit and then,
Yeah.
2 hours of makeup before the show. And like it was that. So the physical part of that was pretty intense. I remember for that, I would go to the gym and I would sing the score of the show while I was running like 6 miles an hour, like pretty
Yeah.
good clip.
Yeah.
And it definitely helped because I remember the very first time that I wore the costume of Shrek and did the opening number, I ran out of breath about 3/4 of the way through the song, like full on could not sing the rest of the song because I couldn't breathe anymore. Like I had
Right.
run out of breath. And that was like a big sort of like check on myself, like, whoa, okay, you need to be even more physically prepped for this. And then School of Rock was something that I couldn't even really fathom it. I remember when I got hired, they told me, they're like, so it's just 5 shows a week. You don't have to do any of the matinees. It's just the evening shows. And I was like, five? I'm like, I'm a Broadway professional. I can do 8 shows a week. Like, I appreciate that, but I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and they're like, no, it's five. And I was like, okay, how about we meet in the middle? I don't need to do all 8, but I can do 5 or 6, maybe even 7.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's 5. And I was like, okay. And then I got there and I did my first week of shows and I was like, oh yeah, there's no way. Like, there's no way you could do that show twice in a day. Like I used to tell people that the physical demands of doing Dewey in School of Rock were, if I did not lay like prone on the couch all day long before the show, I would notice it in the show. It doesn't mean that I did
Mm.
that every single day, but if
Yeah.
I took my kids for a walk through the park for half an hour, just to leisurely walk through the park, just the amount of energy that I expended doing that when I was in the show that night, when I was at almost the end of the show, I would feel that I had to like give it like a little extra oomph because it literally took my like energy gas tank from full to empty every single night. And it
Right.
was wild. It really was something that I was like, this is a massive physical undertaking because it was not only the singing, which was all like rock tenor singing. So that's vocally
Right.
challenging. You're running around the stage because it's a high energy role. There's a lot of dancing. You're jumping off of desks. You're picking up kids. Every scene that you're doing, you're like, instead of just talking, you're like, come on, guys, we got to do this. And then like everything is like, blasting your voice. Even that made me cough. And it was such a massive physical undertaking that when I finished, I was like, okay, I made it. I made it through that one. I can do anything now.
Yeah, I mean, there's the classic Hollywood line of never work with kids and animals, but those kids are like crazy
Yeah,
talented. Was that
yeah,
fun to work with kids of that age on that show?
yeah. I loved it. I think it was definitely helpful that I have my kids now, I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. And at the time, my kids were, I guess my daughter would have been like 7 and my son would have been like 4,
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4. And the kids I was working with were about, 9, 10, 11 to like up to about 14.
Yeah.
So I love kids in general. I love my own kids, like I love being a dad. And so I think a lot of the parents, even when I came into the show, they were like, man, it's really nice to have like a dad with our
Yeah.
kids. Like they felt a little just like better that I was gonna, like look out
Yeah.
for them from
They're
just
like,
like a little
Alex was
bit.
a horrible influence on them. We're
Yeah,
so
no,
glad there's a
Alex
dad
was
in here.
great. He was great with them, but but he wasn't a dad, and so I think that they were kind of stoked about that.
Yeah.
And I loved working with them. I mean, I tried to treat them, kids working in the entertainment industry is a very interesting thing because you have to, in a way, once you enter the professional world, you are treated like an adult. Like you are expected
Yeah.
to be on time, to know your lines, to do your job. Like there's no, I don't feel like it today, or I
Yeah.
had a rough day at school. Like sadly, in the professional world, that's, as we know, it's like any job. Like you don't, you got to leave it at the door, And so it's hard for kids because they do have to like step into a truly adult world with adult expectations. But at the same time, they're kids and you want to like try to keep their childhood innocence as much as you can. So, I would do a lot of stuff with the kids, like usually at intermission, if I could feel the collective group of kids kind of getting a little, not losing a little bit of focus or not giving full effort, as opposed to like, yelling at them or being like, what are you guys doing? I need more out of you. I would
Yeah.
always do like a big huddle and I'd be like, all right, guys, this is so good. We're having so much fun. Remember, there's people that came here tonight that paid like a lot of money and it's their first Broadway show that they've ever seen. So we got to give them everything we can. Okay. Everybody
Good.
good? Everybody good? And we do like hands in the middle, like, so I tried to lead it a little bit more like, a sports team or a coach, as opposed to like, you're not hitting your lines and I'm going to stage management and I'm going to, get you written up or something like that, So
Right.
I love working with kids. And I think a lot of it is because I'm a dad and I love being a dad.
Yeah. What was that? What is it like being on a show, even 5 days a week, but most are running 7 or 8 days a week, and
Yeah.
having a family and having kids and feeling that pressure of I feel like I need to lay prone all day today and I can't
Yeah.
really give you what you need right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is that experience like having a family and working that much?
Well, I will say this, that it is somewhat of an anomaly. Sadly, I wish that there were more people in the entertainment business, especially in theater. I feel like in Hollywood, there's more people that have kind of more regular lives because Hollywood has just slightly more regular hours. I say that with, a major asterisk because there's also plenty of times in Hollywood where your hours are insane and you're
Sure.
traveling. But with theater, it's harder to have a family because you know that you're not going to be able to tuck your kids in any night of the week. Like
Yeah.
it just maybe Mondays, but like, so there are sacrifices that are made. The thing that I always tell my kids whenever they get, like, oh, why do you have to leave to go do this? Or I wish you could stay home, is I always tell them, I'm like, listen, the trade-offs are this. While I may not, for instance, while I'm living here in LA and I have to like go shoot a show for 3 months or something like that, and I'm gone,
Mhm.
I say it stinks that daddy has to leave for 3 months. But you also have to remember that when I'm not working, which is for most actors is more of the time is you're between jobs,
Yeah.
um, I'm like, I get to pick you up from school. I take you to school. I coach your little league teams. I am at every single recital. I am like intimately involved in your lives.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of dads who have more kind of traditional 9 to 5 jobs, they don't get to take you to school. Some of them are working until 7 at night. They come home, they maybe have dinner with you, and then they get you to bed. But like, and that's not a shot on dads who have lives like that because that's how most men provide for their families in America,
Yeah.
and so I always try to tell them like there are trade-offs. While there's moments where it's going to be harder and it's not going to feel traditional, there's also plenty of time that I get to be intimately involved in their lives and a part of their
Yeah.
everyday existence. And they've had really cool experiences of like living in
Yeah,
New York and living in LA and getting to go backstage at Broadway shows and,
sure.
movie stars like talking to them and like they're, their best friends. Like, so I'm like, there are trade-offs. And once you can kind of, explain that to the kids and they can understand that. And as long as they feel loved and, attended to, and
Yeah.
that you are there or they are your focus, my kids at least have been able to pretty much deal with it pretty well.
Yeah. Are there things that you would say no to at this point, or do you just have a plan? If you got a Broadway lead right now, would you go live in New York and figure it out, or
Right.
are there things that you say no to now?
There are definitely things that I say no to now just because like it's too much of a burden on my family.
Sure.
Again, at this point, it kind of becomes you do the whole pros and cons thing. It's like, all right, well, if I was to take this job and be away from my family for whatever, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, is the role paying enough that like, okay,
Mhm.
this is what we need as a family? Or it like, because also then I'm putting more stress on my wife of like, who's going to pick the kids up at school, and do we need
Sure.
to hire a nanny to do something like that? So you got to logistically just to look at like, can we cover the basic, like we're not going to lose money in me taking this job.
Yeah.
Then it becomes like, I'm 42 years old now, like now I really am looking to like have a career that is more purposeful, and as opposed to just like bouncing to whatever the next job opportunity is.
Yeah.
So then I'm looking at like, is this role going to move my career forward? Is it going to be something that is, challenging to me? Or is it just something where I'm like getting a paycheck? And so
Right.
then if it's just getting a paycheck and the paycheck's not like that amazing, then I might be like, I'd rather be home with my family. And
Right. Right.
that's more important to me than like, you know, doing Brigadoon
Yeah.
in Ohio or something. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
which is why Christmas Story on a limited run at the Amundsen works, but Christmas Story National Tour probably doesn't pay enough to be
less.
gone
Yes,
so long.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, that
Exactly.
makes sense.
Exactly.
I gotta ask you about Kevin can F himself. Is that what you call it? I don't. What do you like
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
when they were prepping you for like media stuff? Is that what you
It
call it?
was Yeah, we always actually would check before every interview, because the policy of AMC was always like, if we can say the F word, then
Uh-huh.
say it, because it was more jarring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if it was, something that was live, or if like the audience was not really that type of, that the audience that they were looking for, then we would say Kevin can F himself, and that was perfectly acceptable.
Got
But
it.
whenever possible, they wanted to say like, I'm Kevin, I Kevin can, like really
Yeah.
lean into it.
You can say it here. I just know that my
Yeah,
grandma might listen to this episode, so I don't want to say it.
yeah.
But you
That's
can let
fair.
it
That's
fly.
fair. That's fair.
um, I fell in love with the show from the very first episode. It basically because the premise is so dope from the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah,
Um, can you explain real quickly, because you'll do it better than I can, the multicam versus single cam setup of this show and how it works?
yeah. So first thing you need to know is there's two different ways to shoot a TV show. There's multicam and single cam. Multicam is shot with multiple cameras, usually four cameras. It's usually done in front of a live studio audience. There's usually a laugh track. It's more well lit. It's usually done in sitcoms. So anything like Friends, Cheers, Seinfeld, All in the Family, all of those sort of like classic sitcoms were all shot multicam. And then in the late 90s, they started doing single cam comedies, which would be things like The Office, Parks and Rec, stuff like that. The Good Place. And single cam is shot obviously with a single camera. There's usually four full walls, so it doesn't feel like there's a missing fourth wall. There's no
Mhm.
live studio audience. There's usually not a laugh track. It's usually lit in a more realistic way.
Mhm.
And that sort of became the new norm. So anyway, so you have these two kind of forms of comedies, and especially of sitcoms. And the story of Kevin Kneff himself, uh, I'll give the quick version of the why it became a show. So there was a show called Kevin Can Wait that was on CBS in the 2000s with Kevin James from King of Queens,
Yeah.
and it was sort of his sequel to King of Queens. And there was a wife character on that show played by Erin Hayes, and she was sort of a typical sitcom wife, didn't have a ton to do, kind of had a lot of scenes where she'd be, carrying a laundry basket and being like, oh honey, don't do that, sort of classic sitcom wife. And then between the first and second seasons of that show, they had brought Leah Remini in for like the last few episodes of season one, and they decided to kind of try to recreate the King of Queens magic. They would bring her on full time, and they decided to kill off the wife character, and they kind of did it with no explanation. They came back for season two, and they were just like, "Where's mom? Oh yeah, I forgot she died last month." Like it was like very like a couple of lines, and then don't worry about it. And which was kind of a big hubbub. And then there was an interview that Kevin James gave where he had said, somebody said like, "Why'd you kill off the wife character?" And he said something to the effect of like, "And we ran out of ideas for her," which feels a little like a cop out.
Yeah.
And so it made a lot of people frustrated, especially a lot of female viewers and writers, and people being like, what? You couldn't think of any storylines for a mom character? And so when that happened, the woman who created our show, Valerie Armstrong, she was like a writing assistant on an AMC show, and they had an in-house sort of writing program, and she pitched this show called Kevin Can F Himself. It was essentially based on, let's follow that sitcom wife character and let's really see what she's about, because she's so sort of classically underwritten. And so the premise of the show of Kevin Can F Himself starts out, the show opens and it feels very much like a multicam CBS comedy. And I play the sort of buffoonish, doofy husband, who's got the hot wife who's out of his league and his dumb friends, and they're playing beer pong. And it seems like the show is about me, and I'm the central character.
Yeah.
And it takes place in Boston, so I've got like a thick Boston accent. And Annie Murphy from Schitt's Creek plays my wife, named Allison, and she sort of like comes in this opening couple of minutes, and again seems like the classic sitcom wife with the the laundry basket and saying, honey, don't spill beer, whatever.
Yeah.
And as she leaves to go into the kitchen, which in most shows we would then not see her for the next 3 or 4 scenes, in our show, the second that she goes through the kitchen door, boom, we smash cut to single camera, and we follow her into the kitchen, and we see that she's actually like now it's like dark and grimy, and her clothes are a little more tattered than what you realized in the bright lighting of the multicam. You realize that she's in a pretty loveless marriage, that she kind of hates her life, that she sees no way out. She's in this grimy little house. So the show is basically her figuring out how to escape her sad reality. And what's really cool about the show is that it goes from multicam to single cam. So anytime she is with me, the character of Kevin, it's a big, silly, broad multicam comedy. And then the second that either I leave the scene or she leaves the scene, it becomes a single cam. And it's dark and grimy, and it feels like Breaking Bad. So it's a really interesting, actually truly original concept, which is so rare in Hollywood.
So rare.
And we were really proud of it. We went 2 seasons, and it was a cool show.
Yeah, every transition was so like beautifully jarring.
Yep.
And oftentimes like wildly inappropriate. Like, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like as the
Yep.
viewer, I wanted to stay with her in the dark and grimy because that was the real. And then
Yeah.
she'd walk into the room with you and you're like, oh no, like you would feel it
Yeah.
emotionally,
Yeah.
those changes.
Yeah.
Did
But
you
Kevin is like living in such a like sort of, in his mind, positive place of just like everything's hunky dory and silly and easy. And yeah.
yeah, was it I mean, you had so many references to go off of. Like you said, Kevin James, Ray Romano, Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
Like there's
Yeah.
like a long list of sitcoms that it plays off of.
Yeah.
Was it easy to hone in on who that character was? Was it hard to figure out how big to go with it, how silly to go with it? How did you hone in what that parody was going to be?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. I am a huge lover of multicam sitcoms. I actually, strangely enough, was teaching a class on multicam sitcom acting while I got cast as Kevin. And I remember
Mm.
like in the audition process, I mentioned that, and they were like, oh, wait, okay, so you really know what this is that we're trying to parody. And I was like, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I always said that my sort of like my North Star, like what I was aiming at, was a combination of Ralph Cramden from The Honeymooners,
Mhm.
Jackie Gleason,
Yeah,
and Peter Griffin on Family Guy.
sure.
Sort of just that, like the main thing about Kevin was his sort of false bravado, his like clueless bravado, that he
Mhm.
always thought that what he was doing and saying was the best thing ever. And he was
Right.
so full of that like assurance. And so in regards to like how big or small to do it, we definitely would play with it. And there were certain takes where they'd be like, maybe that was a little too big, or certain takes they'd be like, I think we can lean in more. I would say that we locked in pretty good after maybe 2 or 3 episodes,
Mhm.
of kind of just getting a sense of like how big the style should be. And it was, it was challenging because there was times where I had to say lines that were so offensive and so mean and so cutting and truly like,
Yeah.
misogynistic and
Yeah.
racist and like just bad.
Yeah.
But your job as an actor is to never judge the character, right? Is to always
Sure.
bring complete, acceptance through the character's mind of what they're doing is right. And so, there was times where I'm sure they have B-roll of me like saying something really terrible, and then they're like, cut, and I'd be like, I'm sorry, Annie, I'm sorry, like instantly being like, I'm sorry I had to say that to you, you know. But yeah, I was really proud of that show because, as an actor, you just want a gig, you want to work, great, then you want to work on with good people. I was working with great people. Then you want to work on something that's like people like, a lot of people liked it. And then last, I would say, is you want to be a part of something that's actually saying something to the world, like it actually
Yeah.
has a message, it has a point of view. And I
Sure.
felt like our show really did, which was a really cool kind of experience to have.
Yeah, definitely. So you started out as a young boy in Chicago area wanting to animate your own characters that you were going to voice, and then wanted to do TV and film, and you've done a lot since then. Moving forward, do you just want to play characters that matter in any form? Do you have specifics? I want to be on stage. I want to be on screen. Does it matter to you moving forward?
It doesn't. I love doing theater. I think I will always do theater regardless. Like, even if, let's say, tomorrow I won an Oscar, now I'm a big, huge movie star and I don't ever have to work again because I've made millions of dollars. Okay, great. I
Yeah.
still would do theater, like,
Yeah.
even for just the love of doing theater. So
Sure.
I think I will do theater for the rest of my life. And then in regards to like doing TV, what I really, my next sort of like big hurdle or challenge that I'm trying to like, or box that I'm trying to tick, is to be on a show that just goes more than a couple seasons,
Sure.
which is hard in today's, environment, just because it is a more fickle sort of TV viewing audience and
Yeah.
situation and system. But that's sort of the next big sort of hurdle that I want to check, is for the challenge of doing a character for, longer like that, that is continuing to grow, because I've done long runs of theater shows, but the character's not changing, it's the same every night. So
Yeah.
I like the idea of like trying to have an arc of a character, whether that be comedically or drama wise, that really is like longer than 8 episodes and a couple seasons.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the next big thing. And then, I've always I've always said I would be super happy to be on, a sitcom that runs for 6 7 years, goes into syndication, and then I just move down to Florida and I open a hot dog stand, and people come up to me and they're like, hey, aren't you that guy from that show? And I go, yeah. And they go, hey, say the thing. And I go, bada or whatever, whatever it is, like some catchphrase. I get a picture with them, and then like I go about living my life. Like, that
Yeah.
seems very that seems great to me. So we'll see what comes next.
Yeah. Are there Broadway roles that you hope to do one day? I mean, I saw you from a distance at the LA opening of Beetlejuice,
Mm-hmm.
at the Pantages, and I thought, wait, he could be up there, right? He totally could be doing this. Which, by the way, I don't know how they sing like that 8 shows a week,
Yeah, it's
but
pretty wild.
regardless, are there roles out there that you would love to do?
Yeah, I would say this. I would say there's one that, just like, since I was younger, it was the first musical I ever loved, was Phantom of the Opera. So there is a part of me that, like, and for years when I was younger, before I had done really anything, I would always be like, I want to be Phantom and Phantom of the Opera. And it eventually is going to come back to Broadway. So, that's one that I would want to do. But then the other ones, and this is sort of a cliche answer, especially from, Broadway actors, when they say like, what shows do you want to do? And I go, well, it hasn't been written yet because I want to do an original role. So, but I mean, there
Yeah.
is some truth to that like, at this point, it's more exciting to me to do an original role and like really create something from the ground up, as opposed to stepping into a show that's been long running.
Yeah,
Not that I wouldn't do that, but the better challenge is to originate.
for sure, for sure. I want to take a little bit of a turn here because a big part of this podcast is me trying to figure out my spiritual faith religion journey.
Yeah.
What has all of that meant to you in your life? And there's no agenda, no starting point. That's the
Yeah.
question right there. What has
Yeah.
any of that meant to you throughout your life?
Uh, I will say faith and my journey with faith, my I'm Christian, so my journey with Christ has been my whole life. I grew up in the church. My I remember the church that I went to in Chicago was really cool because we were like 5 generations deep or something in that church. So like I really felt a sense of roots. Like even as a young kid, like I felt, and this is a bad example of it, but in the same way that like a rich kid whose like parents owned, Chase Bank or something, like would walk around and they're like, I own this place, like I had that as a kid in the church, and not in
Yeah,
a like egotistical way, but I just really felt like, yeah, I can go anywhere in this church because this is like my home. Like my family's been here for years.
yeah,
So it was definitely a big part of growing up, and I was in like youth groups. I was at the church multiple days in the week, and I feel pretty lucky that I've never really drifted from my faith too much. I mean, obviously I'm in no ways a perfect person, but I haven't had, moments in my life where I've really felt far away from God. Um, which I am extremely thankful for. And I think it also helps that my wife, Lisa, is a very religious person as well. And faith has been the cornerstone of our life in the arts,
mm.
in that, because it's such a hard thing to do. Like there's so many ups and downs, and the highs are so high and the lows can be so low, and there's no like sense of like where's the next paycheck coming from, and how are we going to get through the day, which is hard enough when it's just yourself and a spouse, but then when you get kids involved, it really is can be very, very stressful.
Yeah,
And we have always relied on our faith to like be sort of a baseline that we believe that God loves us. We believe that God has a plan for us. We believe that God wants good things for us. And if we truly can believe that, we don't have to know every theological concept and every history of the Bible and all that. But if we can just believe that there is a God, that he loves us and that he wants good things for us, then it has allowed us in the down times to trust a little bit more that it's not quite so hopeless, or that it's never going to get better.
yeah,
So for us, it really has been a huge part of our life. um when things are good, we try to remember, like I always try to think about, so often when people pray, they're praying from a place of like, please help me with this problem or with this thing, like
yeah,
asking God to fix whatever is troubling them. But we try as much as we can. We definitely have those prayers as well, but we also really try to pray from gratitude every single day as much as we can. Just, you know, thanking God to be alive and to live in a home and to live in
yeah.
America and not in a war zone and to like have healthy
Sure.
kids. And, and when we do that, I think that it keeps us having perspective on the daily of what's really important.
Yeah, we my daughter's 9,
Nice.
and probably when she was around 4 or 5, our nightly prayer routine, um, she was having nightmares, and so we were praying about it. And she
Yeah.
literally at 5 said, "Well, how come when we pray about it, I still have them?"
Right.
And that's when you really start going, what am I teaching her about who God is? And are we
Right.
calling him like this vending machine or like this genie that
Right.
we ask for stuff? And literally from that night forward, our prayer time just became a thankfulness gratitude list.
Yeah.
What are we grateful for today? Let's turn our attention to gratitude instead
To the
of
good stuff.
everything
Yeah.
wrong that went
Right.
today. And that there's something taking care of us. We don't know how it works or to what level, no matter what I think about my faith or what I think about God and how he works, that it seems to be always the consistent, that you could always turn to gratitude.
Yep. Yeah. definitely.
How is that? How is your faith played out in Broadway and Hollywood circles that maybe don't agree? And I
Yeah,
ask that because when you say I'm a Christian, that can mean a thousand different things. And I
sure.
feel like it's almost like what you said at the end of a take when you want to turn to Annie and apologize.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
when you say I'm a Christian, the first thing I want to do is give seven disclaimers and apologize
Right.
for a lot.
I'm not a bad Christian. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I totally. That is so. First of all, in regards to like Hollywood and Broadway, I will say this: that I think that sometimes there definitely is a. It's not as it's not nearly as you know faith based as a lot of the country, right?
Sure.
So but I do think that sometimes it gets a rap of being like a truly just like hedonistic,
Yeah, sure.
anti-god kind of place, which
Sure.
I don't think that it is as much as it gets painted that way. I
Yeah, I
think there
love
are
that.
definitely an underbelly of any industry or city or whatever that is bad and is not living a very good life or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are plenty of people who are like, they're from the Midwest or whatever, and they may not be somebody who go to church every Sunday, but I think that there are plenty of people who are okay with their faith and have a somewhat faith based life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I will say that there was times in my life where I felt not scared to say I was a Christian, but like I definitely wouldn't bring it up. I wouldn't like be really outgoing about it,
Yeah.
because you do get people, especially at younger ages, where people are quick to fight and want to like call you out and be like, well, what about when Christians did this? And you're like, well, I didn't do that.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So like there was a time where I was a little bit quieter about it. I feel like now, again, I grew up Lutheran, which we always called it diet Catholic. It was very much about like, my faith is for me, between me and God. I
Mm,
don't need to get into your business at all. It was not very evangelical in any way.
right.
And I think I do still kind of have a little bit of that kind of mentality. Like I don't try to get like preachy. I don't try to be like, well, why don't you come to church with me? Like I don't know. I'm sure that there's part of me that should be should be doing that, but
Yeah.
I kind of feel like what I've always said, and one of the things that like I try to teach my kids and my wife and I both tell them is like, try to live a life that is positive and joyful and successful and kind, to the point that feels so different from the way that other people are living that people go, what is it with you? Why are you, how are you like that?
Yeah.
And then I say, well, I have a faith in God and I believe in, that there is good in the world and that I'm trying to be a part of the good, and and that Jesus teaches us to love
Yeah.
others as ourselves, and all those things. But we always try to say like, you don't need to push your faith into somebody's face, but you can push your life being positive and good and joyful
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and let people see that, and then maybe that can lead to a conversation.
It's the
So
whole
it
St. Francis of Assisi, spread the gospel, and if necessary, use words.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, it's one of the best
Awesome.
quotes ever. I love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's been something that like I've never like denied it. I've never like lied about it, but there was definitely times when I was younger where, people would be like bashing on Jesus or Christians or something, and I would just kind of like not say anything. But then I
Sure.
would feel
Yeah.
so bad about it. Like when being at home, I'd be like, I should have said something, and like Jesus wanted me to say something and I
Yeah.
didn't. So I
Yeah.
think as I've gotten older, I've tried to, again, I'm not one to like get into fights with people on set or something, but I will now, if somebody is talking that way, I'll either just like remove myself from the situation, or I'll just be like, well, there's other sides to it, and there are
Sure.
good Christians out there, and yes, there's plenty that the church and that Christianity has done that has been shameful and terrible, and but if you go to the core of what it's supposed to be about and what I think most rational people base their faith in, it's a good thing.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we can easily just be honest with the fact that Christianity has built some power structures that have harmed people,
Yeah,
just like Hollywood has
yeah,
built some power structures that have harmed
absolutely.
people. Politics has built some power structures that have harmed people. It's part of
Yep,
humanity, and that's okay. Man, I am so
yep.
grateful for you taking the time to do this and hopping in your recording booth there and spending some time with me. If people want to follow along with what you got going, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Eric Pete, EricPete. And I also have I like to tell people about this. I have a fashion Instagram because I love clothes and I like to show that I'm not a model skinny guy. So I like to show regular shaped guys that you can still dress cool in an affordable way. So I have a fashion Instagram, which is at the Portly Gentleman, all one word,
Oh
the
goodness.
Portly Gentleman.
I need to follow
And
that immediately. I
you got to
need that
check
in
it
my
out. It's pretty great. You got to
life.
check it out.
Awesome, man. Well, we're cheering for you. We'll be fans, and I appreciate you doing this, man.
Thanks, Eric. This has been really fun.